Okay, hello internet. So somebody commented on the last video about how he didn't like where the camera was positioned, and because the camera was looking up. But I started looking on videos at YouTube, and I feel like most people position the camera, like when they're holding like a camera, like you'll hold it like right around like there. Of course the arm's extended more, but like the camera's looking up. So I think that might have just been an issue with the user, but I put the microphone closer to my mouth this time, and I changed one of the settings. So I think the audio should be a bit clearer this time. But I don't know. I mean, it seems fine to me here. But, what I wanted to talk about today was, the TikTok. TikTok's getting banning soon. Or supposedly, the Biden administration announced that they weren't going to enforce it and would leave it up to Trump. So who knows what he's going to do with it. I kind of have suspicion he's going to backtrack on it, but who knows. So one thing that happened as a consequence of the TikTok ban is that I guess TikTokers discovered that China has more social media apps, and they decided to try out this app called Red Note, which I'd never actually heard of before until it went viral. So this is the South China Morning Post reporting on it. It says, why are American TikTok refugees migrating to China's Red Note ahead of possible U.S. ban? And Reuters was reporting on this as well. China on target, Red Note on the rise. But there's been a lot of dumb videos. Well, I mean, TikTokers aren't the brightest people in general. They sure aren't the brightest of Americans, but one thing that came out of it is that they made a lot of videos. They made like a lot of the short videos, because I guess it's the first time like seeing what China is like from actual Chinese people, aside from just what they see in the American media. Which, I'll be the first to say that the American media is not the place to get information about China. But, I mean, on the flip side, it's not, the Chinese government isn't the best place to get information on the American government either, so take that as what you will. But some of the arguments they were just presenting were so absurd, and they were taken in by kind of like the image the Chinese government wants you to see of China. It's the sort of people that are highly impressed by all the tall buildings, the the robots, the fancy electric cars, whatever else. But I wanted to talk about kind of the more of a realistic look of what exactly China is. China is an authoritarian country. It's communist in name, but it's unlike anything we have here. It's just different. I'm not sure it's really different in a good way, but at the very least, it's different. And then, I mean, they covered so many things that I think I'll just bring up a couple things about China that maybe people should know about before they start singing the praises of China. And then one thing I just want to point out is Shanghai. It says here, Shanghai's shrinking expat population, what might this mean for China? And the expat population in China has gone down drastically after the pandemic, because China had, I don't know whether it was the most, but it had one of the most draconian lockdowns, pandemic lockdowns in the world. And a lot of people just decided they didn't want to go through with that again, and have been permanently scarred for the country, so they just went home. And I think something like more than half, it might even be quite a bit more than half, have left the country. I mean, that's a huge number, and there has to be a reason why. And then one of the things about the Chinese culture too, and this isn't particularly unique to China, it's kind of an Asian mentality, is that you'll never be Chinese. And I'm not talking an ethnic sense or being perceived as a Chinese, which, you won't for either of those, of course. But you'll never be a Chinese citizen. Never. You can have a Chinese wife and live there for 20 years and still not be a citizen. And then China, the country isn't kind to foreigners. Just one of the examples, I think it was Shanghai. They banned foreign musicians from performing in the country. And this is just one example of many. Oftentimes if you want to deal with government services, you need to have a Chinese friend with a Chinese passport who will be able to vouch for you, or they just will write you off and not deal with you. Not to mention all the different benefits you get separating the people who have the Chinese passport, Chinese citizenship, and those who don't. So I think before you start singing the praises of China, people should try actually living there for a couple of years, and I think they'll quickly get a more balanced view of what China is. And I think Chinese people would kind of laugh at, besides from the ones that are mostly, they actually believe the government propaganda. But there's plenty of smarter ones, and the smarter ones are probably just laughing in amusement at at some of the things coming out of this red note exchange. And then one thing that's interesting that's been going on lately in China is youth unemployment is very high. This is the South China Morning Post reporting about it. It says youth employment on the rise in China as more graduates enter the labor market. This says China's youth employment surged to 17.1% in July, the highest level in 8 months since the National Bureau of Statistics adopted a new method of counting. The jobless rate for 16 to 24-year-olds, excluding students, was up from 13.2% a month earlier and ended 3 months of decline, according to MBS data released on Friday. But 17.1, that's a big number. That's not South African level of numbers, but that is quite high. And then one thing you have to understand about China is just how competitive and fierce it is in the country. In China, there's a big emphasis on diligence and making good use of time and climbing a status ladder. When they're in school, they do long hours of study. They don't have the American thing where they emphasize a lot of clubs and sports. You really go to school to study. And then when they go to university, they have the university exams, which are highly competitive. And then they go to university, and that's when they can kind of, they have 4 years where they can kind of wind down a little. Then they have to enter into the workforce. And since there's so many people in China and there's not enough jobs, people are competing for, they're competing for those positions. And it's not a fun process or system to be in. I mean, it's nothing that we can imagine, like, as Americans. It's just it's a whole different culture there. I mean, you understand it if you live there, but if you're not there and you've been raised in a different environment, then you're just outside of it. And then once you finally get that job, you're going to be working longer hours than an American job would probably ever make you work. And then how will you be compensated for those long hours and all the study you put in? Well, if we go to the government website, which I think this is an official government website. Well, this was published in 2023, but I think this is data from 2022. And I mean, you could look elsewhere, but this is just the site I found. So this is the average annual wages. Average annual wages of persons employed in urban, non-private units by region in 2022. This number was that. And if you put it into USD, you get 15,552. And if we compare that to what American wages are, if we just search up average annual American wages, and it's going to get, it says the average annual income for all occupations in the United States was $61,900, and that's probably gone up a bit. I actually think in California too, which is the state I live in, I want to say it's something like 80,000. And it's saying down here by Forbes, the male median average was 72,000. I mean, that's quite the disparity. I mean, even just taking this 61,000, that's 4 times. And then one thing you also have to understand about China is the reason why they're able to build all these nice things, the fast trains, the big buildings, is they expanded very fast, and they took on a very bullish mentality. And the government's accruing a lot of debt. I mean, this is reported by Reuters, but it says IMF projects a steep rise in China's government sector debt. And it says in 2023, China's central and local governments and other government-related funds and entities owned as much as 116.9% of GDP in debt. And the fund expects the burden to grow to almost 150% of GDP by the end of the decade. And Wyatt from Defense Politics Asia made a video about this recently. But one of the things you have to understand about China is China does not have a lot of natural resources. Like, it's not like, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Russia, where they have gas or they have some sort of resource that people need. Like, their economy relies on manufacturing, and they have to constantly be finding new markets and dominate those markets for them to be on top. And that doesn't come cheap. That requires a lot of money in research and development. Requires a lot of government subsidies. And it's this. I mean, you just see the trend. It's just going to go up. It's just another. And one thing I think people also often don't think about when we're talking about countries is the passport. So what exactly can Chinese people do with their passport? For one thing, you're not able to hold dual citizenship. If you hold a Chinese passport, then you have to be Chinese. You can't be both Chinese and Brazilian or what have you. And if you look at where you can go with a Chinese passport, like, it really isn't. It's not. There isn't really that many places you can go. I mean, completely visa-free is like Thailand, Malaysia, Morocco. Iran, Kazakhstan. I guess there's a few, Serbia, Belarus, but really not that many. And then, like, even Russia, which, the Chinese and Russian government tout the friendship between them. But even they only issue visas upon arrival, and they don't do the visa-free access. So the Chinese passport is not a good one. And then just taking the American passport, and like, there's better passports too. Like, if you look at the Japanese one or some of the, a few of the European passports, they're actually better than this. But if you see all this green, these are all the places that Americans can go visa-free. And this includes, Japan, most of Europe, most of South Africa, Canada. And then this is all blue, so you'd have to get a visa, but it's very possible to go there. I mean, it's not even close, you can't compare. And then you're also going to, if you're in China, then you're living under a very authoritarian system. China is also a very urban environment. I mean, I shouldn't say it's very urban, but if you're going to live in the cities, then it's very congested. You'll have to deal with high rents. The healthcare still isn't quite there. I mean, sure, you're able to go places fast with the trains, but even with the trains, like, the amount the government paid to build those train networks isn't nearly made up by what they paid for them. So I think the point of this video is, before you get taken in by the shiny images of China, you should realistically examine. And there's literally probably hundreds of thousands of videos of testimony from people who've actually lived in China, and they can tell you, like, what exactly the experience is like. Just don't be taken by the influencers who'll show you a video of one of the electric cars you'll see in China, and then somehow from that you draw to the conclusion that China is somehow a more pleasant place to live in than the United States, because it's not true. Okay, that's it. Goodbye.